The 7th of August 1942. What would you do if the jungle itself seemed alive? Screaming in pain, crawling with insects, soaked in blood. And the only light you had was muzzle flash and burning ships, while wounded men begged for help in the dark. That is where the real story of Operation Guadalcanal begins. Not with maps or speeches, but with terrified medics crawling through wet mud under Japanese artillery fire. Because when US Marines stormed the beaches of Guadalcanal in the Solomon Islands, this was America's first major ground offensive against Imperial Japan in World War II, and nothing about it went as planned, especially for the medical corpsmen who landed with the first waves and immediately found themselves treating shredded bodies while bullets snapped through palm trees. Because the Japanese defenders had vanished into the jungle, and every shadow felt like death watching you breathe. And these medics were unarmed or lightly armed, marked only by red crosses that meant nothing to an enemy that believed surrender was shameful. And as the sun rose that morning, wounded Marines lay screaming on beaches later named Red and Blue, with limbs torn by shrapnel and bellies ripped open by machine gun fire. And corpsmen worked with bare hands, using morphine syrettes and bandages already soaked in blood within minutes. While offshore, Japanese aircraft began attacking the U.S. fleet, leading to chaos that culminated 2 days later in the terrifying Battle of Savo Island on the 9th of August 1942, when Allied warships were ambushed at night and sunk in minutes, leaving burning wrecks and floating corpses drifting near shore, forcing medics on Guadalcanal to treat sailors who swam ashore covered in oil, half-blinded, some screaming that their ships were still exploding behind them. And the horror deepened as the campaign dragged on, because Guadalcanal was not a fast battle. It was a grinding nightmare, lasting 6 brutal months until the 9th of February 1943, and disease became as deadly as bullets, with malaria, dysentery, and fungal infections rotting men from the inside, while medics struggled with almost no supplies, performing amputations with dulled tools, reusing bandages, and watching men die simply because plasma could not reach them through the mud and rain. And during the Battle of the Tenaru on the 21st of August 1942, when Japanese forces launched a suicidal nighttime assault, medics followed Marines into the darkness, crawling forward under tracer fire to pull screaming wounded men back while hearing Japanese soldiers shouting and charging out of the black jungle. And some medics described hearing gurgling sounds from wounded enemy soldiers left tangled in the wire, crying for help until the jungle went silent, a sound that stayed with them for life. And then came Edson's Ridge. Officially, the Battle of Bloody Ridge, fought between the 12th and the 14th of September 1942, where Japanese forces attacked wave after wave, screaming as they charged uphill into machine gun fire, and medics worked non-stop for 48 hours, sometimes treating men while lying flat beside them, as bullets clipped the grass inches above their heads, sometimes being forced to choose who lived and who would be left to die because there were simply too many wounded. And one corpsman later recalled holding a Marine's intestines inside his body with both hands while whispering lies that he would be okay, even as Japanese grenades exploded nearby, showering them with dirt and body parts. And the psychological horror was constant, because at night the jungle came alive with insects, rotting smells, distant screams, and the fear of infiltration, as Japanese soldiers often slipped through lines to bayonet sleeping Marines, forcing medics to treat silent stab wounds in the dark, trying not to scream themselves. And during the naval battle of Guadalcanal, from the 13th to the 15th of November 1942, the fighting reached a level of chaos rarely seen, with battleships firing point-blank, aircraft crashing into the sea, and wounded men arriving at aid stations with burns so severe their skin peeled away when touched. And medics worked without rest, hallucinating from exhaustion, sometimes mistaking shadows for enemies, sometimes freezing in terror before forcing themselves to move again, because stopping meant someone else would die, and the jungle itself seemed cursed, with bloated corpses left unrecovered for weeks, eyes eaten by insects, bodies used as cover during firefights, and medics walking past them every day until death became normal. And yet, through all this horror, there was extraordinary heroism, because medics repeatedly ran into fire to save others, dragging men back by webbing straps, treating enemy wounded when they surrendered despite knowing it could be a trick, and refusing evacuation even when sick or wounded themselves. And by the time Japanese forces finally evacuated the island in February 1943, more than 7,000 Allied troops were dead and over 19,000 Japanese soldiers had perished, many from starvation and disease. And Guadalcanal proved that Japan could be defeated, but the cost was written in blood, sweat, and the haunted eyes of the medics who survived, men who carried memories of screams in the dark, of hands slipping on blood, of choosing who deserved the last dose of morphine. And even today, Guadalcanal remains a place where the jungle still hides rusted helmets, bones, and unexploded shells, silent witnesses to a campaign that pushed human endurance beyond its limits. And now I want you to think carefully and honestly. If you were a medic crawling through that jungle with nothing but bandages and courage, while death whispered your name from every tree, would you have run forward to save a life? Or would the fear have finally broken you when the screaming started again in the dark?